You won't believe what Michelle Obama revealed about her daughter's struggles with fame. This story is one of those rare glimpses into the challenges that come with growing up in the spotlight, especially when that spotlight is brighter than anything most of us can imagine. Imagine being the daughters of the first Black president of the United States. Sasha and Malia Obama lived most of their early years in the White House, under constant public scrutiny. Every move they made, every outfit they wore, every smile they gave, all were examined under a magnifying glass by the public and the media. But here's the shocking part. Despite the glittering life in the White House, Michelle Obama's biggest fear wasn't about politics or her own future. It was about her daughters and the very real dangers of fame. Michelle Obama wasn't just worried about how her daughters would cope with the usual pressures of growing up. No, it was the constant attention, the paparazzi, and the overwhelming invasion of their privacy that truly haunted her. For her, being a mother in the White House meant knowing that the entire world was watching her children. As she told Kylie Kelsey on her podcast, Michelle revealed just how hard it was to balance the life she wanted for Sasha and Malia with the reality of being public figures. I wanted to give my girls enough rope to live and be normal teenagers, but I was also worrying about them turning up on page 6 because they were doing what normal kids would do, Michelle shared. Imagine that. Even the most basic, innocent actions, like grabbing a coffee or hanging out with friends, could land them on the front page of a tabloid. It's not something any parent would want for their child, and yet that was the reality they faced every single day. But despite the fame that followed them, Michelle and her husband, former President Barack Obama, tried their best to keep their daughters' lives as normal as possible. Still, there was no escaping the public eye. They lived through it, and to Michelle's relief, Sasha and Malia managed to grow up strong, resilient, and surprisingly grounded. However, Michelle continued to worry, knowing that even after they left the White House, the spotlight never truly faded. It stayed there, lingering over them like a shadow, and it wasn't going anywhere. This is where it gets interesting. Michelle had to face something that many people wouldn't even think about: how to raise her daughters in a way that allowed them to be themselves while also dealing with the pressures of fame. Despite their fame, despite the constant judgment, Michelle worked hard to make sure Sasha and Malia were equipped with the skills to survive and thrive. She wanted them to build their own lives, to figure out who they were and what they wanted to do, but to do so without being eaten alive by the media circus that came with their last name. And it wasn't easy. Michelle understood the responsibility she carried as a mother and the unique challenges of raising children in the public eye. The idea of trying to give her daughters a taste of normalcy while living in the most famous house in the world must have been a delicate balancing act. But what makes this story even more compelling is the fact that despite her best efforts to protect them, the fame never really stopped. Even when Sasha and Malia moved on to different phases of their lives, they were still confronted by the same problems: the constant questions, the cameras, the endless attention. Michelle had hoped that once they left the White House, they could finally live their lives without being constantly followed, but that wasn't the case. Stay with me, because this is where it gets tragic. Michelle Obama had already done everything she could to shield her daughters from the harshest parts of fame, but as she soon realized, there's only so much you can do when your kids are thrust into the public eye from the moment they're born. She went on to explain that even Malia, while at Harvard, was confronted with the same overwhelming attention. The questions, the requests for pictures, the endless demands for her time. For a young woman trying to find herself, the burden of fame was heavy. And it wasn't just the media, it was also the pressure of being constantly identified by who her parents were. Malia and Sasha never truly had the chance to figure out who they were without being tied to their famous parents. Now, the first part of the story has already shown us the extent to which Michelle was concerned for her daughters. But here's the thing. These concerns weren't just rooted in the challenges of fame. It was the deeper fear that her daughter's true identities might be lost in the shuffle. The world was watching, and the weight of those expectations could have crushed them. But despite everything, Michelle had a plan. As Michelle Obama continued to reflect on her fears for her daughters, she revealed something even deeper about the pressures they faced growing up in the White House. Fame, she realized, wasn't just about the media and the public's expectations. It was about how it could shape the identity of a young person. Sasha and Malia were forced to grow up in an environment where they were never fully anonymous, where every phase of their childhood, every school event, every awkward teenage moment could potentially be made public. Imagine not being able to make a mistake without the world noticing. That's the kind of pressure Michelle feared for her daughters. Michelle spoke candidly about how, even though she tried her best to protect them, she knew the world would always be watching. They still are dealing with paparazzi and being who they are and trying to carve out their own identity, she said. Despite their time in the White House being over, the spotlight didn't go away. It followed them everywhere. It was the kind of attention no child should have to grow up under, and yet it was the reality they faced. At the same time, Michelle couldn't completely shield them from the public gaze. In the back of her mind, she worried about the lasting impact this constant pressure would have on them as they tried to figure out who they were outside of their parents' legacy. But here's the shocking part. Despite the public eye being so invasive, Michelle never once talked about retreating from it or running away. No, she took a different approach. Michelle knew that her daughters needed to learn how to live with the spotlight, not escape it. She had to raise them in a way that allowed them to flourish under the weight of this unwanted attention while also giving them the tools to stay true to themselves. And she did this by being intentional with every move, every decision. She wasn't just raising famous daughters. She was preparing them for a world that wouldn't give them any slack, a world that would judge them for every decision, every choice. Let me tell you how Michelle managed to do this. Through wisdom, patience, and understanding. She knew that fame wasn't something Sasha and Malia could simply escape. Instead of trying to hide them from the world, she focused on giving them the strength to face it. Michelle taught them how to be polite in the face of constant attention, how to balance their privacy with the inevitable public scrutiny, and most importantly, how to remain grounded no matter how much fame surrounded them. It wasn't just about managing the fame, it was about not letting it define them. Michelle's mission was clear. She wanted to ensure that Sasha and Malia never got consumed by the noise of the world around them. Now, what makes this part of the story so compelling is Michelle's approach to parenting. She wasn't trying to build a shield around her daughters that would block out the world. Instead, she prepared them to walk confidently through that world. She understood that fame was a monster, as she described it, and she didn't want her daughters to be eaten alive by it. So she focused on giving them the tools to protect themselves from within, teaching them to navigate this monster with grace. And though the world often tried to bring them down, Michelle was there to remind them of their worth and to keep their feet firmly on the ground. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Despite all the attention and the pressure, Michelle still had one ultimate goal in mind: giving her daughters the ability to live their lives on their own terms. Sasha and Malia had to learn how to balance their normal teenage desires with the reality that they couldn't just be regular kids. They couldn't walk down the street without someone recognizing them, and they couldn't go to a college party without getting stopped for pictures or questions. Yet, despite all of this, Michelle was determined that they would not lose themselves in the process. This is where Michelle's strength as a mother really shines through. She didn't just focus on keeping the media out of their lives. She worked hard to ensure they were prepared for the inevitable public attention. She knew that one day, Sasha and Malia would have to stand on their own, and that they would have to deal with the consequences of growing up in a family that had shaped a generation. So, Michelle did everything she could to raise them in a way that would allow them to build their own identities and live life authentically. As Michelle Obama's daughters, Sasha and Malia, transitioned into adulthood, the pressure didn't ease, it just took on a new form. Malia, in particular, had a unique challenge ahead of her when she started her freshman year at Harvard University. Despite being a bright and accomplished young woman in her own right, Malia's life was still heavily influenced by the very public nature of her family's fame. Michelle, ever the thoughtful and protective mother, shared how this new phase of life was overwhelming for Malia. College should have been a time to explore, to find herself, to make mistakes, but instead, it was filled with constant reminders of her famous parents. The questions, the requests for pictures, the constant recognition, it was all a lot to handle. Michelle spoke about Malia being approached with questions like, "Do I know you?" and "Can I get a picture with you?" over and over again. And here's the crazy part. For someone who just wanted to be a regular college student, these simple interactions could feel like an invasion. The idea that a young adult, eager to grow and experience life like any other, couldn't escape the shadow of her parents was heartbreaking. Even in a place as prestigious as Harvard, Malia found herself in the spotlight, unable to find the anonymity that most students take for granted. And that wasn't just a burden for Malia, it was a struggle Michelle had feared all along. Michelle had always tried to prepare her daughters for the unwanted attention, but this was different. College was supposed to be a place where they could make new friends, build their own futures, and develop their own sense of identity without the constant lens of public scrutiny. Yet, for Malia, it seemed like that was impossible. No matter how hard she tried to blend in and live a normal life, her every move was watched, judged, and photographed. And while Michelle had worked hard to equip Malia with the emotional tools to deal with it, there was no denying how exhausting it must have been. It's one thing to be famous as a child. It's another thing entirely to be an adult, trying to figure out who you are while still being constantly reminded of your family's legacy. But this is where it gets tragic. What Michelle hadn't anticipated was just how relentless fame could be, especially in the digital age. Social media, paparazzi, and the insatiable public curiosity only made things harder for Malia. Michelle's concerns were no longer just about what would happen when they were younger. She now had to think about how her daughters would cope as adults, navigating a world where everyone felt entitled to be a part of their lives. Despite all of this, Michelle remained fiercely proud of how her daughters had handled it. She didn't want Malia or Sasha to be consumed by the fame. She didn't want them to lose themselves in a world that saw them as nothing more than the daughters of the former president. So Michelle did what any mother would do. She kept encouraging them to be their true selves, to not let the fame define them, but instead let their character, intelligence, and integrity do the talking. Michelle also realized that this kind of upbringing, this constant public scrutiny, had actually given Sasha and Malia the strength and resilience they needed to move forward in their adult lives. They had already endured so much in the public eye, from their awkward teenage years in the White House to the constant spotlight they faced as young adults, and they had come out of it stronger. And even though Michelle would always worry about the toll that fame could take on them, she also understood that her daughters were incredibly capable of handling the world that had once seemed so overwhelming. What Michelle had done, what no one could see from the outside, was create a foundation for her daughters that would allow them to stand tall despite the weight of public attention. She had shown them how to be kind, how to be strong, and how to protect their own sense of self, even in the face of constant scrutiny. But as we're about to see, the story doesn't end here. Because despite everything Michelle did to prepare them, There was one decision that would forever change the course of her own future. And that decision had everything to do with her daughters and the fame they still struggled with. Now, here's where the story takes a surprising turn. Michelle Obama, a woman who had been at the very center of political power, who had stood beside her husband as he led the country, began to face a very different kind of pressure. With the legacy of the Obama family still resonating across the nation and the world, there were whispers about Michelle possibly stepping into a new role in politics. The idea of her running for office, perhaps even for the presidency, was a question that lingered for many. People wanted her to continue the family's political journey, to carry the torch in a new way. But Michelle, despite her immense popularity and qualifications, was resolute in her answer. She wasn't interested. And here's the shocking part. Michelle revealed that her reluctance to enter politics had everything to do with her daughters. It wasn't just about her own ambitions or the pressure of public office, it was about them. Not only am I not interested in politics in that way, but the thought of putting my girls back into that spotlight when they are just now establishing themselves, we've done enough, she explained during her interview with Kylie Kelsey. This statement hit hard because it reflected a sacrifice that very few people would understand. Michelle wasn't thinking about her own future, she was thinking about Sasha and Malia's future. She understood that the world had already been given enough of them, and the last thing she wanted was to thrust them back into the suffocating spotlight. After years of raising them through the pressures of fame and politics, Michelle wasn't willing to let them be consumed again by the demands of public life. It was a moment of clarity, one that showed just how much Michelle was willing to sacrifice to protect her daughter's independence and peace. Now, this is where the story gets truly interesting. Michelle's decision wasn't just about stepping away from politics. It was about choosing family over fame, privacy over power. She knew that her daughters had finally started to carve out their own lives and identities. They were no longer just the first daughters. They were individuals with their own dreams, their own aspirations. To put them back under the microscope of the public eye would be unfair, and Michelle wasn't willing to do that. Her love for her daughters and her fierce protection of their right to live as normal a life as possible outweighed any political dreams she might have had. But here's the craziest part. Michelle's decision was also a powerful statement about what it means to be a parent. It wasn't about what the world expected from her or her family. It was about doing what was right for her children. Michelle showed the world that despite all the external pressures, her role as a mother came first. And in doing so, she cemented her legacy, not as a political figure, but as someone who valued family above all else. Destiny took an unexpected turn for the Obamas. While the world may have wanted to see more of Michelle in the political sphere, she chose a different path, one where her daughters could truly live for themselves without the constant weight of their family's fame hanging over them. And though the world may never fully understand the sacrifices Michelle made, it's clear that her love for Sasha and Malia was the guiding force behind every decision she made. The legacy of Michelle Obama isn't just about the White House, politics, or fame. It's about a mother who stood tall for her daughters, who made sure they had the chance to grow up as individuals, not as extensions of their famous parents. And in the end, that's what makes this story so powerful. Michelle Obama chose the most important role of all, being a mother who put her family first no matter the cost. This was her legacy, a legacy not defined by politics, but by the strength and love she showed for her daughters and the quiet, steady sacrifices she made to ensure they had a future outside the spotlight.